Excellent. So let's talk a bit about today's session. We're going to talk about this shift that we need to make when we're in leadership roles from being overly direct and managing people through to trying to look at how we coach for high performance. And this is a topic that I work a lot on with leaders and clients that I work with, and born largely out of my personal experience, having moved through different leadership positions in large organizations. And early in my leadership career, I didn't realize that there was this shift required. So when I first started in a management role, I'd have to put my hands up and say I was pretty awful as a manager. And it wasn't until I had some development, had some feedback, worked through a process and started to develop the skills of coaching. And I want to share some of those changes that I made as I went along with you today, because hopefully there'll be useful distinctions for you in your roles as well. And so it's this shift from direct management to coaching for high performance. That's how I like to think of it. So these sessions, if it's your first session with me, then just I guess some background. The working world that we live in nowadays is like full on. So everybody's full on. You've got far too much to do, never get to the end of your to-do lists. And actually creating space in your day or your week for personal and professional development can be really difficult. The reason clients will bring me in is to give them that space. And so I run sessions like this for my wider network to give you that space. So you get an hour. I do a couple of these a month. So one's focused on leadership, which is what we'll talk about today. The other is normally focused on sales, growth, business growth, and kind of improving communication skills. So they're the two areas that I tend to work on. Today, we'll talk a bit about leadership, but the idea of this session is to give you some clear thinking space, hopefully to share some new perspectives with you so that you start to think differently after today's session. And at the end of the session today, I'll just kind of ask you to reflect on what are your key actions from today's workshop. So we'll look at why people direct as a management style, manage and jump in. We'll talk about some experiences of direct management. I'll ask you to think about that for yourself as well, either someone that's been managed overly, directly, or maybe it's something you've done yourself. It's certainly something I've done myself without realizing it. Then we'll talk about how to change your approach. How do you make a shift in that dynamic in the way that you work and coach? And then we'll talk about some principles of coaching. How do you actually coach? What are the key shifts you need to make? So I'll start with this quote from Steve Jobs. I'm sure you may have seen this one before, but it always resonates me when we think about this shift to coaching. Steve Jobs famously said, "It doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do." And I would go one step further and say we hire smart people to do what we brought them in to do, which is, actually deliver and perform, think for themselves, be creative and add value to the business. That's why we hire smart, high quality, high caliber people in a business. We want them to be able to do that for themselves. And when we think about directly managing, I think it's a trap that a lot of new managers will fall into. And I say that because I fell into the trap. And I think one of the causes is that when you're a high performer, what you're used to doing is kind of getting stuff done. You're really good at rolling up your sleeves, kind of getting your focus in and churning out tasks. And that's really useful when you are a contributor in a business and you're doing your job. The minute you become a leader, yes, you still have that amount of work to do. You have a certain amount of work that's your responsibility, but actually the majority of your responsibility now shifts to coaching and helping your team to deliver and become high performers. And just rolling up your sleeves and jumping in actually doesn't work anymore. It starts to work against you, not for you, because you just don't have enough hours in the day to do that and be an effective manager. But if we look at some of the reasons that people do this, why do people directly manage? First is, I've been a high performer. Sometimes it's I know how to do this best. So people are actually thinking, well, I can do it better than the person that's working for me. So I'm going to jump in and do that. The other reasons are actually when you are an individual contributor in a business, you have a real sense of control. What you do actually is determines how successful you are in your role. So actually, the more you do, the more successful you are. You have a control of your own success, right? The minute you're managing or leading a team, you have less control. You have less span of control because other people are involved and what they do actually contributes towards your output. So we can start to see why people actually think, well, if I just tell them what to do, tell them exactly how much they should be doing, tell them, what to do, when to do it, how to do it, all of a sudden it feels like you've got a great sense of control. But actually, what you'll find is that starts to work against you. The other things that people, feedback I get when I work with leaders is that they have standards. So people have standards that they work towards, and they want people to meet those standards. And if people are dipping below those standards, they tend to tell them to increase and improve to meet those standards. And the problem is that tends to be a short-term lift, and then people drift back to what they were doing before because it doesn't feel sustainable for them. Another common cause I hear is, what else is there to do? How else do I do this? I just don't know what else to do other than jump in, give direction, and save the day on certain occasions. Delegation's an issue. We won't talk a lot about delegation today. It's a separate workshop that I run on delegation, but people don't know how to delegate effectively. What I see happens is that people either micromanage or they abdicate. So they're either all over someone when they hand a task over, so they make sure that they do absolutely everything, or they just hand it over and walk away. And delegation is right in the middle. How do we effectively delegate? But we won't do that today. We'll do that in another session. And then, of course, final thing I hear is that I don't even realize I'm doing it. I didn't know it was something I was doing. And that would be, that would probably be atypical of my experience early in my management career. I was overly, directive, overly scrutinizing my team, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. It was a complete blind spot for me. And that's really important, because if we're not aware we're doing something wrong, we can't change it. Awareness is the first step to being able to change. So we have to get this right. So they're the reasons why. What's the impact of direct management? What I've seen happen within the businesses that I've led, within the businesses I now work with as clients of mine, I've seen that those businesses where there is a really directive management style, there's higher stress in the business. There's higher stress from the manager, because they feel as if they have to have everything under control. And there's higher stress from the team that work for that manager, because they're always waiting to be caught out or told to do something differently. The stress level really does increase. There's greater dependency, because that manager tends to encourage people to check in more frequently and to check that what they're doing is right. So you end up with this kind of gap in terms of autonomy. There's more dependency within the team. The morale is definitely lower. So the energy is flat. People feel less trusted and less valued. The engagement scores, if you measure engagement index, it's lower engagement for those teams who are more directly managed than those who are coached and developed. And we'll talk a bit about that. Performance levels are lower because they tend to be waiting for direction or waiting to be told, when performance dips. There's less contribution of ideas and innovation. So we find that is stifled within a business where there's overly direct management. And of course, there's greater risk of burnout. And that isn't just the team members, that's the manager. Because if the manager's trying to do all these things and not effectively coaching and delegating, then their workload just keeps increasing. And then finally, turnover is a challenge for these businesses, higher team turnover. I've worked with clients in the past where they literally will have people that stay between 6 and 8 months, and then they go because they just can't thrive in the environment. And I think particularly as we look at, in the next generation of workers in work environments and cultures, actually they tend to be less tolerant of poor management. They move more quickly. They have a greater sense of autonomy. They have a greater sense of confidence in themselves. And if the work environment's not right, they're quite happy to move on. And that's something I've seen not only in my clients, I've seen it very closely with friends, family, network, even my own children. They will not tolerate a poor manager. And then if we start to think about different management styles and the cohorts within businesses and teams, I'm sure you've seen this. This is the performance distribution curve. So within a business, generally speaking, once you get to larger businesses, there's this acceptance that we will have different levels of performance within the organization. What that general performance curve tells you is that you'll have 2% of people in the business whose performance is so poor that it's unacceptable. You'll have 14% who have room for improvement. So they're working, but then they're not working optimally. Then you have a 68% middle of the bell curve, about 68% of people that are meeting expectations. Their performance is kind of the norm. It's what you would expect within a role. You have 14% who will exceed. They go above and beyond. They deliver at a higher level than you would generally expect. And then we have the 2% that are absolutely knocking it out of the park, outstanding. And they tend to be the people that, guess what, get promoted later on into management roles, but they don't get trained, and then they slip right back down to the bottom of the bell curve as they get that progression. But what is interesting to me is, as you think about this performance bell curve, the people that tend to require and actually sometimes want more direct management sit at the bottom of the bell curve. So they're probably in that 2 to 16% bracket. But everybody else in the business, including some of those people that have room for improvement, everybody else in the business actually wants and needs to be coached. They want to be coached to improve and maximize their potential and performance. And many leaders and managers often don't even realize this is an opportunity for them. Because when you start to coach people, you get much higher levels of engagement, you get much higher levels of autonomy, responsibility, and ultimately performance. And that's the kind of gap we want to try and transition into. So what it says is that actually, for 80 to 90% of the time, we should be coaching. We should be really starting to challenge people to think differently and coach them rather than direct them. So I'm interested in your kind of experiences so far. So there's a chat box. I'm sure you've seen it in Zoom. So there's a chat box in Zoom. I'm just going to get the chat started by putting a comment in there to say, here's the chat. I'd love to hear your experience, either why you think people direct, manage, and jump in. If there's something that I haven't covered and you think, well, here's a reason why I've seen someone do it. Or what's your experience of direct management? It might be you've been on the receiving end of it and it hasn't been particularly nice for you, or you've done it yourself unintentionally and you haven't realized. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you just drop them in the chat, and then you can just kind of I'll read them out as they come in. Brilliant, thank you. So, Chris, timing / prioritization, just too busy to slow down and coach. Yeah. So you've got so much going on that actually creating space for coaching is too difficult. Yeah. Too busy to slow down and coach. Yeah. I completely agree. And I would argue that was when I first started to make the transition, that was the way I justified to myself carrying on a little bit longer, being a bit too directive. So yeah, absolutely, I can relate to that as well. Tanya, thank you. Like you said, Justin, if somebody has not had training to manage staff effectively, yes, they just don't know any different. This is kind of how I operate, and it's what I'm doing. Yeah. Sergey, I think you just joined us. Sergey, we are talking about why people are either overly directive or why they're kind of jumping into managed situations when actually they could be potentially guiding or coaching their team. So people just putting some comments in the chat here. Hend, you've asked me a specific question. I hope you don't mind me reading it out. So Hend said, is there a specific criteria or set of skills and qualification that should be present in a management role? I would say actually having some formal structured development around management skills and leadership skills. There's lots of ways to get that exposure, but that was what I would say. Yes, get some development, because the data is really interesting. What the data shows is that 65% of managers are promoted and they're not given any leadership development or management skills. So 65% of people are put into a management role and then left to get on with it. And that I've seen it myself. I've had that experience myself for the first couple of years, and it just leaves people a bit adrift. They don't quite know what the best thing to do is. Andy, thank you for your comment. I've ended up direct managing due to lack of trust in individuals. Yeah. So Andy, you're thinking those people at the bottom end of the curve, that that 2 to 16%. Yeah, if you don't have trust, you feel like you need to give some people more direction. Yeah, and it is as we said, it is appropriate, right? There's a time and a place for that. It's really good for corrective behaviour. It's good for people who are perhaps slipping, whose performance is slipping. It's good for people who are new starters and say, I just need to be shown the ropes. You might have to be a bit more directive early on. So there is a time and a place for it. We shouldn't completely discard it, but we should recognise it should be in that 5 to 15% of what we're doing. The rest of it should be coaching. Tanya, thanks for your second comment. Having been at the other side, it is extremely demotivating and frustrating being micromanaged, and you stop giving ideas or thinking for yourself. Yeah, I've been in exactly the same position myself as well, and it's one of the, you almost feel a bit defeated when you're in that position, don't you? And especially if you're a high performer, if you're someone that has this this self-image as being someone who contributes and performs in the right level, actually it starts to undermine your own confidence, and you don't enjoy the working environment. And they do say, don't they, people join companies, leave managers. And that is so true. Join companies, leave bad managers. Matt says, hi, Matt. Had both. Some micromanaging my career, which stumped my growth, and then genuinely didn't push, whereas coaching pushed me further than I could have imagined. Brilliant. Yeah, that's superb. And I've had that experience myself, having worked with a manager that's a really good coach and gets you to think more of yourself than you even realize was possible. And hopefully I've been on the other side of that, where I've been a manager and I've coached and challenged people to think bigger for themselves than they thought possible. And I think that's a really valuable relationship that you then have with your teams, and you kind of, I think you kind of step into the realm of legacies here, where you start to create legacies for people in your businesses, where they start to think of themselves in a way they couldn't have done without that coaching and development that you invest in them. Brilliant. Hen, thank you. Because of the tight time and shortage in staff that should perform duties. Yeah, so if you're understaffed in a business, yes, sometimes people will jump in and just start to take over or overly direct and manage. Absolutely. And then Andy says, Johnny's comment is that he micromanages just to get the job done more efficiently. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Johnny. Yeah. Sometimes it feels like this is going to help me get the best out of this situation. And I think you bang on, Johnny, in the short term. And what happens is we end up with lots of short-term interventions that never turn into anything long-term and progressive. And we'll talk a bit about how to make that shift now. Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for all your comments. That's really useful. So let's talk. I want to share this performance curve with you. I don't know if you've seen this before, but this is an intro. I always kind of look at this when I think about the type of manager that is in a business and what happens in the climate. So on the chart here on the left-hand side, on the y-axis, we've got performance and a sense of purpose and contribution to the business. And on the x-axis, along the bottom, we've got stress and pressure level created, okay? And what's interesting, I would say I've worked in every one of these 5 categories, right? So on the left-hand side, you can be, bored at work, not challenged, not stimulated, just kind of going through the motions, through to feeling calm and confident about what you do, through to this middle section, they call it eustress. Eustress is positive stress, right? I've got some challenge, I've got some tight deadlines, I've got some work I find meaningful, I'm good at what I do, and I hit this performance level that we call eustress, right? It's positive stress, I feel good about it, I don't feel too much stress. And then the minute I get pressure that is way above that eustress, I hit what we call distress. And you'll notice that performance starts to decline. And actually people start to feel worried, they start to feel anxious, and that anxiety stops them from being able to perform. Right the way into, I feel completely anxious, I'm not sure which way to turn because I don't trust that my manager has my best interests at heart. And I've worked right the way along this spectrum with different managers and leaders I've worked for, right? And what we have to understand is that there's a function within the brain that when we put people under too much stress, when we press or push people to results they don't believe they can deliver in timelines they don't deliver, there's this thing that happens in the mind where it triggers a response from the reptilian part of the brain, hence the lizard, called the amygdala. And the amygdala draws all the blood supply from the brain to feed itself, so to feed the function. And that function is freeze, flight, or fight, right? So normally in a work environment, you can't fight, right? And you can't flight, you can't leave, right? So you tend to freeze. So your brain stops thinking, you stop having function, you actually start to create barriers for yourself without realizing it. And because the amygdala takes all the blood supply from the part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex is the thinking part of the brain. So all of a sudden, by putting people under too much stress, we actually inhibit their ability to deliver. And what causes this, it tends to be the type of manager and the tasks that manager's working on. So, right at the left-hand side, we've got this absent manager, someone that's just never available to support or coach the team. On the right-hand side, we've got someone that's overly directive, overly pushy. And then in the middle, where we want everybody really to hit this zone of optimal performance, right at the top of the eustress zone, that is only achieved by someone who coaches, challenges, asks the right questions, but does that from a place of having high trust that that person can deliver. And that is the kind of aim that we should all be trying to work towards. So if you find yourself on either end of the spectrum, the way to get your people and hopefully yourself back into that zone of optimal performance is to really lean into coaching. And we'll talk about how to do that next. So let's talk about coaching. I think about coaching when I first learned the skills and the models around coaching. I found it really valuable, really transformative. But I learned this section here. So this section here is called Coach for Change, and it's about how to start to use coaching as part of your management style or your management approach. Later on in my career, I started to figure out that actually there's a lot more to leadership than just coaching people. We have to think more broadly, and I'll just talk you through 5 steps that I work through with leaders that are on programs and that work with me personally. So the first thing is, to make sure that you have a trust between you and your individual team members and trust as a team. So you need to be able to trust each other and trust as a group. And that is about developing and cultivating ongoing relationships. So trust doesn't get established once. It's an ongoing process. We have to continually revisit trust. And then, of course, we have to have a plan. So we have to have a plan for our role, our department, our part of the business, and be able to communicate that plan so that people have confidence that what they can deliver is aligned with what's expected. And then once that plan's in place and you're communicating it, then we start to think about, okay, let's get agreement, and I call it contracting. Let's talk about contracting with each member of the team so that together you agree what standards you'll meet, what levels of performance are acceptable, how you'll have difficult conversations, how you'll make sure that you maintain accountability in the business with each of your team. So that's the contract that we establish. Second then is to talk about objectives and goals. And that's about breaking down what does that person's performance look like within their position, what are the individual objectives that they are setting out to meet on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually basis, and being able to sit down and document them and regularly review and discuss them, okay, so objectives and goals. And then once that's in place, the third step is to create space where you can actually observe your team members in action, letting them do the things they do best and just being there to be able to observe. Because the great thing about observing as a leader is that you will see things that your team members can't see, and vice versa, right? When they see you operate, they'll see things you can't see. And what that does is create an opportunity. Once you spot those opportunities for a performance enhancement, it opens up the opportunity to coach for change. And that's where coaching fits in. Coaching fits in with a wider leadership approach. And then the final piece, and this links back to Matt's comment actually, the final stage in our model here is heroes in the making. And heroes in the making is about helping people to start to set performance and career goals for themselves that really stretch their thinking, that get them to think much bigger about their contribution towards the business, that get them to think much more about what they're truly capable of beyond just what they're doing today. and join up the dots between where they are today and where they want to get to in future. And that conversation, the amount of times that I see leaders having those types of conversations with people that absolutely transform the way that person thinks about themselves, that's where the legacies are made. And I think about my own journey through development and my career. If someone had said to me at the start of my career, my corporate career, that I would end up where I ended up, general sales and marketing manager of an incredibly large business, 50 plus million, a team of 60 plus people. When I first joined as an individual salesperson, I would not have believed it was possible. And it was only through numerous mentoring conversations, development planning, conversations about what else I'm capable of, and someone else saying, I believe in you. Well, that's stuff that happened that helped me to get to that level of performance. And so these things are really, it's about us as leaders being able to be instrumental in creating these conversations with our teams and helping them to see a bigger picture for themselves and hopefully for yourself as well. So let's talk a bit about coaching. So I love this Simon Sinek quote. I'm sure you all know Simon Sinek, he's the kind of leadership guru from the US. He says, a boss who micromanages stroke, overly directive manager, is like a coach who wants to get in the game. Leaders are supposed to guide and support and then sit back to cheer from the sidelines. So the team actually do the delivery. And that's really important. So leaders guide and support, get clear about what good performance looks like, set the right timelines, set the right follow-up, the check-ins, and then sit back and cheer and coach from the sidelines. That's the idea. That's where we should be always aiming to get to. And so when we're coaching, it's all about this shift in the way that we think about how we interact with people. So rather than giving people answers, rather than giving people direction, we should be questioning. We should be listening carefully to the answers to those questions. And then we should be creating space for people to think, reflect, and act, so that creates that self-awareness of the changes that person needs to make. And in terms of the stage, I think that, this coaching for change stage, this stage is vital because when you think about it, it's about helping people to kind of slow down. And we said at the start of this session, we don't often get a chance to think, slow down, but a chance to slow down, open up. And really, as managers, it's about seeking to understand what's going on for this person. How do I understand more what's happening for this person? And I always like to think that everything you need to know to get the best from each member of your team exists in their own mind, right? Exists in their own head. And there's only one way to get it out, and that is through coaching. So we have to coach people to get these ideas, this inspiration from them. And the way that we do that is to kind of take a coaching approach. So what is coaching? We hear the term coaching. It's lots of things. Here's my description. So coaching is about creating confidence, and it's about creating trust with the other person that you're coaching. It's about doing two things at the same time. It's supporting them so they know that when you are coaching and asking questions, you've got their best interests, but it's also about challenging their perceptions. So, I'll be in a lot of conversations with people where somebody will say, oh, well, I can't do this because of that. And then someone will say, oh, well, that's okay. Sorry, it doesn't matter that you can't do that. But that answer from somebody could be completely wrong. It could be just like limiting themselves through their own beliefs. And actually, as a coach, you're not just always supporting people and saying, oh, okay, that's all right. You're saying, well, actually, can I lay you down? Can I lay you a challenge on that? Can I challenge the way that you're thinking about that today? And that is all about how we start to create value through supporting people and challenging them. And then we start to think about, asking really good questions, questioning people with, the right intention. So questioning to help them think differently, to listen to them, to be confident that sometimes you'll ask a question to someone and they might not answer straight away. And you're confident to create a bit of silence and a bit of space to let them think. And that takes practice, because very often we'll ask a question. If we don't get an answer straight away, we tend to either answer it or we step in. But what we need to start to do is create space for people to think and become more comfortable when they need that space to think. And then, of course, we're thinking about solutions or outcomes. So helping people, coaching people towards something that they're trying to achieve, or coaching them to solve a problem or deliver on an outcome that perhaps they're struggling to deliver on themselves. And it really is about pulling from people, pulling ideas, inviting people to give us their feedback and not pushing them. There might be times when we have to signpost. So we might say to if we're asking somebody a question and we're trying to coach them and kind of guide them, but they say, well, I just don't know. Right. So sometimes we might signpost. We might say, well, have you considered this? But it's not saying we'll do this or go off and do that. We might just plant some ideas and then ask, so if you consider that, what else is possible? And really we're helping people to reflect and shift their own perspective, because very often people can't get beyond what they've already thought of or done themselves. And if you've been on call with me before, you might have heard this statistic, but some really interesting evidence that shows the way that our minds work is that we tend to recycle and repurpose the same thoughts. And as much as 90% of the time, we think the same stuff. And so if we're thinking if we're thinking and acting in a way that isn't working, most of the time we'll just keep repeating it, even though it isn't working, because that's the way the mind works. So we have to start to shift perspectives and give people new ways of thinking. And of course, coaching should be energizing. It should be building new belief and strong beliefs about themselves. It should be about creating focus and clarity, and to help people to move to priorities. What are the things that are absolutely most important for them? And then the final couple of things, it should be about building personal responsibility and accountability to do something or change something. And then, of course, in coaching, it is all about gaining commitment to make a change and then act on that change accordingly. So just, thinking is really good, creating thinking space, but then it's about, okay, what are you going to do now that you've got these new ideas or this new perspectives? And that's most important, because that's where the change actually makes an impact. And of course, it's ongoing and continuous. We like to think of coaching as individual interventions, which they are generally, but they should be ongoing and continuous, because if they're not ongoing and continuous, people tend, the 90% of the recycling thinking, people tend to drop back into what they've done before. So we have to continually, on an ongoing basis, coach people to change. And then final thing about this, and then I'm just going to come to the group and let you kind of give some feedback and take your thoughts. When we actually go through coaching, one of the things we need to do to manage ourselves is park ourselves. Think about parking yourself, parking your input. So we really do want that the ideas and the output to come from the person we're coaching, even when you know yourself what that person should do. Arguably, it's even more important when you know yourself what that person should do, because if you keep giving people all the ideas and all the suggestions, they'll keep coming back for ideas and suggestions, and then you create this dependency without realizing it. So first thing we do is park ourselves, park our input. Then we, of course, emphasize, and the emphasis is on the other person. So it's about really tuning in and emphasizing what the other person can think and can come up with in terms of ideas. We want to make sure there's rapport, that we have a relationship in place with that person, and trust. And I say this, it sounds obvious, but if you try and coach someone without that relationship or the trust in place, then what you'll get is lip service. You won't get the right kind of answers. And even if you challenge, you'll be told what they think you want to hear. And really, we want to get beyond that to actually what's real for that person. We talked about creating space and slowing things down. Actually, a lot of coaching is recognizing that I need to create a bit of space for a more strategic conversation or a more valuable conversation. So I don't want to be doing this in, I've got 2 minutes, can I have a quick coaching conversation with you? Probably won't work. You'll end up telling someone what to do. But actually saying, can we have a slightly longer discussion? Do you want to grab a coffee? Let's sit down and really talk about this, and give yourself the time and space for that person to create clear thinking space as well. Then a couple of other things, we want to focus on the desired outcome. What is it that we're trying to help that person achieve? Because very often in coaching, and when you've got people coming to you with problems, you'll find that they're so focused on the problem, they're not really thinking about the solution or the outcome. And actually, in coaching, our job is to, yes, they're going to unpack the problem. I've got this problem, something's gone wrong, or someone's behaving in a way that's inappropriate, or whatever's happening. That's the problem. Okay, what do you want as an outcome? And that's a really useful question, because a lot of people won't even think about asking that question in a coaching context. And then, of course, we want to ask questions, listen and challenge perceptions, and finally recognize that change for most people is most effective when it comes from the inside out, i.e., they think about the ideas, they're the ones that drive the difference that they want to make, and then they commit to the action. If it feels like somebody's pushing me and forcing me to change, I'll take on your suggestions, but I tend to do it with a bit of defensiveness, a bit of resistance. And then once I've done made that one change, I tend to want to then go back to what I was doing before. So we really want to recognize that change comes from the inside out. So let me just park for a moment. I've got a comment from Han. Thank you. From Hen. Sorry. Thank you, Hen. What if you have a tough member that needs to be coached? How would you deal with him or her? So this is someone that is a bit more defensive, Hen, are we saying? Someone who's got a bit more of a guard up? Yeah. Okay. So the way that I've handled that in the past is I go back. I'm just going to go back a couple of slides. I go back to the model. So it's this model here. Okay. And if someone has like a guard up or is quite defensive, I go back to, okay, have I built enough trust with this person? So do they trust me and do I trust them? And if I don't, then I need to figure out, okay, what do I need to do to improve the trust? Okay, first thing, how do I make this person feel more trusted? Once that trust is established, then the second thing I would do is think, okay, what initial conversation do I need to have with this person so that they and I agree that we can coach? So I would have a contracting conversation, a conversation where I talk about my intention is to help them to develop and improve and grow, and that I want to do that through a coaching conversation, or a series of coaching conversations, but that can only happen if that person is receptive and open to it. And then I'd wait for their answer, right? And I know it sounds strange, but I would coach them into becoming coachable through a conversation. And that I found is the most effective way to do it, because any other attempt to try and break through that defensive guard tends to lead to them being more defensive. So trust, and what does it take to build the trust that's needed to coach them? Then have a conversation about, if I want to start coaching more effectively, working with you in a way that is much more around coaching, how can we do that so that we've got that trust in place to help you grow, develop, and support? Okay, so hopefully that's just, yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Great question. So let's final thing. I'd love to hear your feedback. As you've gone through that session today, what do you think you might need to change? Hopefully you've got a couple of action points that you've taken a note of as we've gone through today's session. I'd love for you to, if you want to come on off mute and tell me, feel free to do that. If you'd rather put them in the chat, feel free to put them in the chat. And I'd love to hear your ideas about what are the kind of 2 or 3 things maybe that you need to change after today's session. Type away. It's interesting because this is always a good reflection for me, and I'm often in my business as well. I work with a small team, and the coaching is a really important thing for me to remember, because it's really easy for me to just keep setting direction or setting tasks. I find that when I do, ask for feedback or ask and coach my team, the suggestions that come back, the ideas that they come up with, or sometimes I'll open up to them and say, what am I missing, do you think? Or what else should we be focusing on? And they'll say, well, what about this? And I'm like, and it hadn't even occurred to me. So that's one of the really useful benefits of getting into this coaching space with your own teams. Okay, Tanya, thank you. A good reminder to get the contract of agreement of coaching. Yeah. When people approach for 5 minutes, ask them to have more time with me and always build trust. Yeah, recognizing it can't really be done in a few minutes. You need a bit more time, build the trust to be able to have more valuable coaching conversations. Yeah, thanks, Tanya. That's great. Andy, thanks, Andy. I need to rebuild the relationship with my team. Yeah, so relationship first, Andy, you're thinking. Yeah, reestablish some of those, that strengthen the relationship so that you can be open, or they can be open to coaching. Yeah, thanks, Andy. Matt, thank you, Matt. Yeah, agree with Tanya that the agreement is incredibly important. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I do a lot of this with clients now. So I also think about this as coach, not just coaching clients, but as I start to engage with new clients and customers, one of the things that I do very early on is I'll talk about, the importance of confidentiality, the importance of sharing ideas, the importance of accountability to actually do something with the ideas that we share. I'll talk about giving them honest and direct feedback, because that's a big part of my responsibility. There's no point me just saying, oh yeah, everything's great, you're doing a really good job, if they're not, if I can see that. So I have to be able to have an agreement with them to be able to give them that direct feedback, and for them not to take it personally and sack me as a coach, right? So that's really important. So the whole contracting piece, it's important with your teams, really, really useful in client and customer relationships as well, to make sure that you get that permission to be the trusted advisor, or to be able to give critical feedback when it's required. That the contracting piece allows you to be able to do that. It's really, really valuable if you can get it right. Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Andy and Tanya. Thank you, Hen, for the questions so far. That's really good. Let me just let me share a couple other things. So I love to remember, so those actions, whatever actions you've got, make a note to yourself. Here's my advice. Make a note to yourself and actually schedule some time. So if something you want to do, is like rebuild relationships, for example, with Andy, maybe it's contracting with Tanya, actually create some time to be able to do those things within your business. Maybe it's some intentional ideas that you've got about how to do the contracting, or when you'll do the contracting, or how you'll rebuild the relationship with your team. What are some of the small things you'll do, and actually schedule them in, so that it's not just an idea that you had on a call that you had, a month from now, you'll have completely forgotten from today's session. So just an idea. Think about how you can schedule some time with yourself to follow through on that action. Hend, I'm going to read your comment out as well. Thank you. Strengthen the communication and the relationship with my team more. Open up for more agreement. Listen more to their point of views, and to open a gate of innovation and becoming a leader. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Hend. Excellent. Excellent. Great takeaways. So schedule some time to reflect on this or do something about it. That's the request from today's session, if you would. Okay, good. Thank you. So reminder that enthusiasm has a half-life. You have all these ideas, and actually creating some space to action those ideas is really, really important. If you would like I always offer you a one-to-one discovery call. If you'd like a discovery call, I will just stick this. I'll send you today's session as a recording, and I'll send you the slides from today so that you've got them if you want to share them or recap on them yourself. If you'd like a one-to-one discovery session, this is just an opportunity to kind of talk through the areas of your business that you think I might be able to help with, or you've got some challenges and you think, actually Justin could be someone that gives me a new perspective on it. Feel free to book a one-to-one. That will take you straight into my calendar. And before we go to questions, I would love to just take a quick photo of everyone in today's session. Are you all right? Is everyone up for a photo? So best game face is on. If you're off camera, if you would come on camera, I would be very, very grateful. Brilliant. Thank you all very much. Look at that smile, Matt. Look at you. Love it. Love it. Okay. I'm going to give you a 3, 2, 1 countdown. So that I'll take the photo. So let me just get my camera up. Hold on a sec. And so I'm going to give you 3, 2, 1 so that you can put on your best face. Remember to look where the camera is. Right. Big smile. Lovely. So ready? 3, 2, 1. Beautiful. Oh yeah, lovely, brilliant. And I will, if you're okay, I will tag you in socials. I'll put this on LinkedIn. I'll tag you in the socials tomorrow when we put up the replay and recording and stuff and the post from today's session. Lovely, thank you. Brilliant to see you. It's a cracking photo, and you'll see the photo on that post as well. Okay, we're at 10 to the hour. And I normally try and give you a bit of time back. So before we wrap up, I'm just going to offer to take any questions from anybody about anything. So, you know, obviously we're normally talking about leadership, but this is like ask me anything. So 5 minutes. If anybody's got any questions, I'm very, very happy to answer them. Who's got a question that they might like a bit of help with?
I only have one question, if you don't
High
mind.
hand. Yeah.
If you have a manager,
Yeah.
okay, who is tough to deal with, and you would like to tell him that he's wrong or she's wrong about something, and you would like to convince her about this one. However, she or he will not convince about what you said. How you convince your manager that he's wrong about anything, for example, a specific thing, for example, at work.
Oh, that's a great question.
Well, given that there is like an area of resistance when you're trying to convince a tough manager, you know. So
Yeah. Okay. Great. It's a great question, Hend. I'm also going to say, you know, we've got some experienced people on this call. So if anybody else has got any ideas, I'd love to hear your ideas. But I'm happy to share some of my own as well. So first things first, it's really difficult to tell someone they're wrong because nobody wants to hear you're wrong. You included, Hen, me included, right? Someone says you're wrong.
I'm happy to hear that I'm wrong, by the way, because if I do believe that there is no perfection, I know, but I'm totally right about what I do. So there is no development for myself, even for myself. I don't
Yeah.
believe in this. I would like to hear that I'm wrong in this and how to develop this. How to
Yeah.
improve it. Yeah.
So, so the problem is when someone is told they're wrong,
Yeah.
They tend to then dig their heels in and stand their ground. Okay, what I tend to do, and so I've had managers where I've had disagreements.
Mhm.
What I tend to do is I will take away. So I normally probably won't deal with it there and then. I'll take it away and do some thinking on it. And I will say to that manager that if we have a disagreement about something, I will say to that manager, I've said to that manager, do you mind if I take this away and have a think about it and come back to you so that we can talk about it again? Right.
Mhm.
And they normally say, yeah, no, okay, yeah. But and they might precursor with, well, you're not going to change my mind on this, Justin, but you know, we can talk about it again. And then what I'll do is I'll go away and I'll just reflect on what is it that's going on. So it may be that they have, you know, that they're stubborn about something, or they have a way of thinking that is, you know, actually detrimental to the business, or they're not prepared to make an investment in something, or whatever it is. And I'll then go away and I'll tend to then think about, right, from their perspective, why do they think like this? And I'll think, right, what they're assuming is that what they're doing is going to deliver this result, or it's going to have this outcome, or that people are going to respond in this way. Okay. And they're naturally thinking, oh, well, it's all going to be okay because this is the chain of events. And then what I'll do is I'll map out what I think those chain of events are. So if they think there's no consequence to what they're doing, then I'll start to go, okay, well, what if there is a consequence? What if actually it reduces engagement and motivation? What if we start to see people's jobs at risk or people wanting to leave? What if we see, you know, performance reduce or whatever it is? And I'll start to lay out like the two paths. So you think it's this, or I might say to them, you know, I've been thinking about a conversation. When you think about this, what is it you think is going to happen as a result? And they might say, well, nothing's going to happen as a result. And then I might say, do you mind if I just kind of lay out the risks or the alternative? And I just say, well, what if this happened? Or what if that happened? Or what if, you know, as the evidence might sometimes say, this could be a consequence? What are we going to do if that happens? And they might say, well, it doesn't matter. But what you do in that conversation is you start to sow some seeds. So that person thinks, actually, I've not thought about it like that. And then I'm a huge fan of saying to people, look, we don't need to solve this today. I'd really like to revisit this. Can I ask you to do me a favor and think about it? And can we talk about this again later in the week or next week when we meet? Because trying to get people to change in a moment is really difficult, but getting them to agree to think about something differently is quite easy. And then they tend to ruminate on this stuff and they'll be thinking, yeah, maybe Justin's got a point, or maybe Hen's got a point, or maybe something she said just started to get me thinking differently. And then when you revisit the conversation, that person's much more open to it. So I always think about, especially big things, planting seeds and then going back and going back, so that over time you start to shift that person's thinking. It's a long answer to a short question, Hen. Sorry about that. Does that make sense? Is that useful?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Slightly different way of thinking. And Tanya, you've got a couple of things as well. Are you
Yeah, with regards to the planting seeds, I think for myself, I often find that they think that then, oh, it was my idea, and all of a sudden they've changed their mindset completely, and it's their idea, and it's a fabulous idea. So planting seeds is something that I tend to use an awful lot with director style as well, and talking to directors and coaching the exec side. So yeah, and definitely one to use. It's all about the prep as well, isn't it?
It is.
Planting the seeds and that prep in it. So yeah.
Giving yourself and then the thinking space required. And that's a really good point as well, Tanya. If you do this, Hen, and then your manager comes around to your way of thinking, don't need to tell them they've come around to your way of thinking. Just take the win. Oh, it's a brilliant idea. You've got my complete support. Yeah. Let them have all of the credit for it, because actually remember that what you get is the outcome you wanted. You don't necessarily need the kudos of having come up with it. And that's a really important point Tanya raises. That soon becomes that person's idea. And in your head, I got you to that point of thinking. Park it, don't worry, take the win, and the win is I got the outcome I wanted. Yeah, that's great. Brilliant question to wrap up the session, Hen. Thanks for asking it, because that's a perspective we haven't covered in today's session. Really appreciate it. Okay, thanks everybody for joining today. Really enjoyed the conversation, really enjoyed the session. We are at 3 minutes to the hour. I'm sure you've all got 2 o'clock, so I will let you go. We have our next session coming up, I think 2 weeks' time in April, but I'll let you know when that is. That'll be a sales-based session where we'll be looking at negotiation principles and skills. So negotiation skills and principle on the next sales workshop. And then the next leadership workshop, I think we're going to go next level into coaching. We'll look at the GROW model and actually how do you coach? So we'll talk through the principles of coaching, like more tactically. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and have a great weekend when you get there. And I'll hopefully see you on the next call.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for
everything.
everything.
Thanks,
Cheers
everyone.
all.
Good to see you.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care. See you. Bye.